It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Kylie, we received an email from Danny, who is having a hard time with a child who's having big emotions, emotional regulation stuff. She said, I'd love to hear a podcast topic on dealing with kids with big emotions, emotion regulation challenges that lead to them hitting themselves in the head in moments of emotional overload. And what can parents do in the moment? Because sometimes meltdowns seem to happen out of nowhere. So the best prevention strategies often don't work.
So the thing that stands out to me the most with this question is the reality that often there is actually very little we can do in the moment. We talk about high emotions and low intelligence, and this idea of when we're emotionally flooded, our thinking part of our brain doesn't work.
Yeah, it just switches off.
And a really, really clear case in point was when I taught our eldest daughter to drive. First day, she was driving straight for a brick wall, and I could not for the life of me think of what needed to happen in order to stop that.
Or you needed to say stop.
I did. I was screaming stop, but at no point did my thinking brain go pull the handbrake up.
Right.
I couldn't, and it wasn't until after that and everything blew up in smoke that it was like, why didn't I pull the handbrake?
Yeah.
But I couldn't think of that in that moment because I was so emotionally flooded with the fear of the fact that we were about to hit a brick wall.
I can't remember the name of the podcast listener. I think her name was Jess. Sent us an email one time and said, you know, that high emotions, low intelligence thing, I don't like it because you're still intelligent. It's just that you're not accessing it. And I think that was, I mean, it's a mnemonic, right? But you can't think straight in a high emotion state is what she said. Let's get people understanding that when you're on the brink, you need to stop and think. But what Danny's saying in her email is when you're over the brink, it's too late to stop and think, which is what happened with you when our daughter wrote the car off on her very first driving lesson ever. Airbags everywhere. I mean, it was a disaster. So how do we help Danny with this? If you had asked me this question a little while ago, maybe a year or two ago, I would have said once the kids are in that high emotion state where they're blowing up, where the meltdown is just going absolutely bonkers, at that point you can't do anything. You just have to wait. And I still think that in many cases, that may be the case because as parents, we've got to have the skill set to respond to that. So sometimes my answer is still going to be, you can't do anything. But over time, I've become increasingly convinced that there are things that you can do. And that's what I think we should talk about in today's podcast episode.
Well, being in a household of girls, there are huge emotions on a regular basis.
So much emotion. So much emotion.
And as I've been learning more about how to deal with my own emotions, which has been so powerful for me then being able to help our children, one of the things that I found really eye-opening is I just have a sheet with all of the different emotions on it. And the other day, our 13-year-old was displaying some huge emotions. But when I tried to talk to her about it, she completely shut down. And as our kids get older, we often find that instead of their emotions getting bigger, they actually hold them in.
It's probably worth highlighting and interrupting just briefly in this story. Emotion regulation is not just the ability to hold your emotions in, it's the ability to express or suppress appropriately. And when children are emotionally dysregulated, like our 13-year-old was here, she's suppressing that emotion, but she's not doing it in a healthy way. It's in a dysregulated way. But she's holding it in because she doesn't want to be explosive. And she also knows that like a wave on the shore, that emotion is coming in and eventually it is going to go back out and she'll be able to process it and deal with it appropriately. But right here, right now, she's blowing up. And rather than blowing up and making it worse, she's now suppressing it. Sometimes healthy, sometimes not. Just wanted to jump in with that.
And so I pulled out the emotions chart and I just said to her, I feel like there's a whole heap of emotion you're feeling at the moment. I said, do you actually know what you're feeling? And she looked at me and she said, uh-huh. And I said, maybe we can use the chart. And one by one, she handpicked about 8 different emotions. Like that is a lot of emotion for anyone to be going through, but especially as a young teenager who's trying to work life out.
And it's even harder when you've got a 5 or a 6-year-old or a 2 or a 3-year-old who's experiencing all of those emotions. And and doesn't know how, doesn't even have the words, doesn't have the labels, the names. There's so much happening inside them, and they just think there's something wrong with them.
And that's how our daughter was feeling specifically this day. So when I realized how many emotions we were dealing with, I said, if you had to hand pick maybe the top 2 that are taking up the most emotion in your body, what would they be? And she pointed to 2. And I went, great. Now I actually, as a parent, have something to work with. Because until that point, I had no idea really what was going on. But now she's given me a really beautiful, vivid picture of this is what I'm feeling.
Now, I want to break this down. For Danny and everyone else who's saying, how am I supposed to do this? Number one, we've got a child who we're stepping in with a tool. In fact, I think I'm going to get the Happy Families team to develop a tool and we'll make it available in the shop. I think that we just need to help people with this. You put the tool in front of your child and say, can you just point to these emotions? Because no matter how angry they are, this gentle distraction that's emotion focused and problem solving focused, it will bring them back to the here and now, and it gets their logical brain working again. It gets them out of that emotional brain into their logical brain. It's kind of like when you say, can you draw your emotions for me? You can do this with little kids, right? And they pull out the black texture and scribble all over the page. And you say, wow, that is a lot of...
Until they take that tool to school and they draw all over the carpet with the texture and you get a phone call from the teacher.
But the important part about your story, Kylie, is the way that you've stepped in with compassion and gentleness and a tool so that a child can identify an emotional state.
I'm 40 plus years old, and for so long I just thought there was angry, mad.
Yeah, sad, angry. It's sad, angry, scared, stressed sort of thing.
And happy.
Yep.
I really struggled to recognize that I could feel a whole heap more. And so for our kids, it's the same. They just think they're angry. That's why we have these big emotions. They think they're angry, but helping them to recognize that actually, no, underneath that anger, there is, on this particular day, it was shame, it was embarrassment, it was feeling alone, it was feeling isolated. There were so many emotions that weren't actually angry at all, but anger is how we express them.
So in the moment, that's your big idea. Let's sit down with the tool and let's talk through the tool, because that's going to build the emotional awareness and the emotional regulation in the child. I want to share, I guess, a more advanced. Not that that's not advanced. I'm not.
I can't believe
No.
Honestly,
I just said that all wrong. What I'm trying to say is, I want to share. You've got great parenting happening here, but I want to share the kind of parenting for the parent who really wants to take on a really big challenge in dealing with really, really mega emotions in some other ways that could also work. But what you said was really great, and I think that it should be encouraged.
Stop talking.
I'm just going to...
Stop talking.
Should I just share my story?
Share your story.
Okay. I did actually share this on the podcast a little while ago. I said that all wrong. I'm so sorry. So I shared this a while ago. We had one of our adolescent daughters lose the plot recently. It was several months ago now. Absolutely going off, really, really psyching at her sister. And when I walked into the room and asked her if she could please step out, she defied me, said she wasn't going anywhere. I mean, she was just, her eyes were on fire. So after 2 or 3 more requests and me standing my ground and staying very soft, very gentle, but also being very clear that there was a boundary that had been crossed and she needed to step out.
So before you go on, that's actually such a key point. If we're not taking care of ourselves emotionally and making sure that we're on point, when our kids are losing the plot, more times than not, we lose the plot.
Yeah, we join them in the chaos.
And we actually create more chaos.
Yeah.
So key to this story working out was that you were in a good space and could hold your ground in being really centered emotionally.
Probably want to highlight just on this though, and this is so important for Danny's question, if we're going to step in and help our children regulate, that whole idea of regulation, being able to express or suppress appropriately, I was furious with this daughter. The way she had treated her sister, I was furious. So I had to regulate my emotion. I had to suppress that, keep it together, and politely, compassionately, and gently see that she was going through a struggle. And that's
a tool in and of itself, right? Recognizing that when our children are showing big emotions, it's actually getting to a place where we can have compassion for what they are experiencing in that moment.
So I held my ground because she was very, very defiant and explained a couple of times she just needed to leave the room and I would be with her soon and we'd work this out. And it was very much oriented towards, I'm here to help you. I'm just going to look after your little sister first. Anyway, she stepped onto our little tiled decking area next to the carport and waited for me. When I stepped outside, having checked that her sister was okay, I expressed to her that perhaps we could go for a walk to the front gate to get some fresh air. Now, our front gate's only about 8 meters from the front door, but she agreed to do it. And so we walked there, and it wasn't nearly far enough. She was still hostile and fuming. And so I convinced her to walk to the corner with me. There's something about nature. There's something about being outside. When your children are having a meltdown, we always try and deal with it in the living room. And I really recommend getting outside. The kids don't respond the same way outside as they do in the four walls of the home.
We talked about this in our Witching Hour episode last week, this acknowledgement that our baby calmed as soon as she was outside. We learnt this lesson very early on and it has paid in dividends every time we've used it with our children.
So when we got to the corner, I put my arms out to her and said, can I hug you? And she said no, because she hated me right then. She was really, really angry. And I just said to her very, very gently and quietly, I just want to share one thing with you, just one. And once I've shared that with you, I won't talk again. And the one thing that I shared with her was that no matter how many doors she slammed, no matter how many insults she shared with her sister, no matter how many challenging moments like this we went through, that I loved her no matter what. Those 3 key words, not I love you, but no matter what. And when I shared that with her, all of the big emotions she'd been feeling dissolved and a new big emotion came over her instead, and she burst into tears and hugged me for a few minutes down on the corner before we walked home and we resolved things. The reason that I'm sharing that as an advanced parenting strategy, Kylie, the reason that I said what I said before is because our capacity to hold our emotions in check, to have and hold compassion for children who are being horrible, and then to express unconditional regard and love for them at the right time, in the right place, in a way that makes them receptive to it and brings them back to a place where they can then move forward with finding solutions. It's a really hard thing to do. But when we get our heart right towards our child, when our heart is full of compassion and gentleness, I think that's really the key. When our kids are having the meltdown, Danny, it's really about the state of our heart. And if we're oriented towards compassion and helping, then we get better outcomes. They do stop hitting themselves in the head. They do stop beating up their siblings. They do stop saying, I hate you, or I hate this world and I want to die. They stop saying those things and they respond to our unconditional love.
Well, just for the record, I didn't really like our 13-year-old that day either.
You regulated very well.
I did.
We really hope that this has been useful. Danny, thanks so much for the email. You can email your questions, podcasts@happyfamilies.com.au. That's podcasts with an S at happyfamilies.com.au. Thank you so much for listening to the Happy Families podcast. We hope that it makes your family happier. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. For more information about making your family happier, please visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.